Briefly with some introductions. I think that's probably the best way to start. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Joel Rubenstein. My background is in pharmaceutical nicotine. Actually, I've been in, for the past 8 years, I've been running both British American Tobacco's pharmaceutical company, and then I left and started up Philip Morris's pharmaceutical company. The first based in Sweden, and the second I was based in Sweden, but the company itself was in Philip Morris headquarters down in Switzerland. And I'm here representing the GINN group, Global Institute for Novel Nicotine. And I don't like introducing other people, so if you want to introduce yourselves.
It's on. Johan Nissinen, I'm here representing GINN. I'm a former member of the European Parliament and Swedish Parliament, and as a member of Parliament I worked a lot with Novel Nicotine.
Hello everybody, my name is Ciprian Boboi. I'm a founder and a board executive of Independent European Vape Alliance, the only vaping body representing the industry at the EU level. I also have a background of entrepreneur for over 15 years in the market. Thank you.
Hello everybody, so my name is Vlad Olteanu. I am an economist and a lawyer by training, and I'm currently very much involved in pharmaceutical regulation and compliance.
Hello, I'm Tomasz Płaska. I'm from Novatic, and Novatic is a manufacturer of pure nicotine and nicotine raw materials. We are based in Poland, and we are also a manufacturer of liquids and nicotine pouches mix. So I represent the manufacturer, let's say, part of our industry.
Great. Thank you all for attending. So just as an introduction to the next hour or so, we're going to talk about the Tobacco Taxation Directive, and the goal of this, it's EU-wide, and the goal of this is basically to harmonize tax strategies, and I'm going to summarize and you'll get more details, but to create a floor. So there's a minimum excise across the EU to kind of level the playing field between markets, and depending on your interpretation, to actually influence public policy. And I think that's one of the hot buttons that I'm hoping we can get some insights on. But if you think about what this challenge is, so if you think about tobacco products in the EU, you've got cigarettes, and you've got cigars, heat not burn, a couple different systems within vaping. You've got tobacco-containing snus, you have tobacco-free nicotine snus, you have gums, lozenges, oral strips are starting to pop up. You have that on the recreational side, and then you also have on the pharma side, gums, lozenge strips, and then you have at the extreme, you have nicotine patches. So if you think of all these nicotine-containing products, you go all the way from cigarettes all the way to transdermal patches. So what is this legislation going to do? How is it going to differentiate between all of these in a fair way and accomplish the goals of the legislation? In terms of the goals, there's a lot of different perspectives here. Who's driving this public debate? Is it the government accountants? There's a lot of money at stake here. Is it public health advocates that are driving it? Or is it politicians? There's lots of different ways to look at this. And then from each of those angles, who are the key stakeholders? Is it about government efficiency and government programs? Is it about businesses? Both legitimate and black market businesses are all affected by this. Or is it about consumers? Is it about smokers and harm reduction, helping them to quit and using financial incentives to push that? Or is it, do we want to minimize and mitigate entry to nicotine? So is it bringing people down or entering into nicotine? What's the focus? And then what are the processes that we're going to be affected? Is it manufacturing, supply chain, and retail environments? All of this matters, and all of this has downstream consequences. So that's sort of what we're going to talk about, and hope you guys can engage in this discussion. So I'll just start off by first, and Vlad, I think I've pointed you in to start, but can you briefly describe what are the key features of the TTD, And how is it expected to, reach its goals over the next couple of years?
All right, it is a very good question, because your question is how is it expected to reach its goals? So TED, first of all, the Tobacco Excise Directive is a directive in the taxation space within the EU. What does it mean in practice? First of all, it is not a first directive, it is a revision directive. So we do have a current TED which is being revised. Second of all, it's taxation at the EU level, which means unanimity in the Council. Unanimities are very difficult to get. In politics, they are even more difficult to get in life. So, unanimity file. Third point, it is excise. It is not the only excise. So those products that you mentioned have a number of taxes associated with them, direct and indirect. This is an indirect tax. Excise is an indirect tax. But VAT is also an indirect tax. So it's not just one tax, it's a specific excise tax, indirect tax, for those products. What is it supposed to achieve? In a nutshell, money for the budgets. Which budgets? Well, the EU and member states. And probably with TED1, so the current directive, the idea was the opposite. So it was member state budgets and then the EU budget. Okay? Why? Because of course member states retain a quite high margin, it's a directive, a quite high margin of modulating. So the directive will put a minimum excise rate, and then member states may maintain the minimum or may go beyond the minimum. Okay? This moved a little bit nowadays. Why? Because the EU budget is taking more and more in the own resources group, more and more money associated with things like TEDOR, so like a direct allocation mechanism to the community budget, linking it to high political ticket items, such as defense spending. Okay, so all those things are moving a bit the dynamics. To bring that money to the budget, the first thing that the taxman should think of is predictability. If you don't have predictability, you have a dream about money. You don't really have money. Higher predictability you have, better your chances are to actually execute the budget. So to really get the money. Is it going to be the case? Let's see during the debate. I'm not so sure that that's going to be the case.
Johan, the next question to you is with a little more specificity, what exactly are they planning on doing? And I'm just curious if you could opine on exactly what is the public, if in fact you agree with it, what is the public policy component to what they're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, first of all, they want to have some kind of harmonization in the EU. And also you have a lot of countries that's pushing for this, because a lot of countries want to forbid all the alternatives, higher the taxes. So they try to find some middle way here, if you're going to read between the line, but it's going to be hard because you have countries like Sweden who want to have harm reduction policies, and then like France now that made nicotine pouches the same way as narcotics. It's like having cocaine on you, which is ridiculous. My view is here they're going to find some in between, because they want to have taxation on it, and the Commission wants the money, basically. Ursula wants to have more money to spend.
And whoever wants to jump in on this one, I'll leave it a bit open-ended, but what are the next steps? Who's providing all the input, and who's making the decisions?
I can take that one. So, in a normal, better regulation way, as defined by the EU, that should be a consultative process. Yeah, so you start with a consultation, you get your data right, you check your data entry points, with whom? Well, with finance ministries, with people in the treasury departments, with that group, and then you make decisions. In this particular case, I think the proposal is clear. The proposal came from the Commission to the Council table. Okay. As I said, Council has unanimity, which means that Council is the decisive factor in terms of decision making. And the Parliament has a number of options to try to influence that. Yeah? But it's not unlike TPD, where Parliament and Council are co-legislators, so there is a clear negotiation and clear powers on both sides. here the council, let's put it that way, has more power because of the unanimity amount. Yeah. Timeline-wise, well, timeline-wise, as we see it in the proposal, it's somewhere around 2028 to 2030. It's a directive, so it needs transposition. And then, of course, once transposition is done, a discussion in the council will determine from which moment the different rules will kick in. It is not because this is in the text that it will kick in immediately. It may be delayed in application for 2 years, 4 years, etc.
I will add here, so let's say this step is done, the TED is adopted with the normal rates, proper rates. They will have the TPD, which, as we know so far, the cancer strategy report suggested full flavor ban, display ban, product ban, actually ban on advertising, including a limit on nicotine caps. So no matter what will happen in the TED, if TPD comes with a lot of restriction, all that forecast and all those plans will be thrown away, because the market with this hard restriction they propose, the market will go black, big part of it.
So when we say about the goals of legislation and the budget goals, let's say, if it would be the only intent, it might be, but in the end there are some other, let's say, unintended goals realized as well with the specific tax rules, and of course tax are also designed in a way that affects a consumer's behavior. And in that way, it affects health of, let's say, society. So even if the tax wouldn't be designed with health of society in mind, it affects the health of society. And of course, the taxes create some frames within which the market products, let's say, are offered. And there is some line when the level of taxes and the way the taxes are implemented affect the illicit market and the appearance of the illicit market. And here we can see that if there was in mind health of society and let's say regulations and taxes oriented on that, then probably we should, and what we do as an industry, we aim for risk-proportionate regulations. And what we can see now in several countries that already introduced excise tax, including Poland, is that actually cigarettes are much cheaper than NGP products in general, let's say. And this is completely not something that we would aim for in terms of risk-proportionate regulations. And also the other aspect and effect that we can see in Poland is the illicit market that is rising. So, okay, maybe the goal is to have more bigger budgets because of the taxes, but there is some line that when you cross it, the tax income for the countries shrinks, and the illicit market appears, and another kind of problems appears as well.
Yeah, which leads into a little bit about the next question is, what isn't working now? Like, why is this a change that the EU thinks is necessary, presumably for the good of the EU?
Well, there is a big need for the harmonization. While among the 27 member states, 21 already tax the vapes. They call it, I don't know, from excise to tax to ad valorem, different models, different rates. And this lack of harmonization creates a lot of illicit, we can call it, cross-border sales, B2C, from countries with no tax to countries with a tax, killing the local players. So a harmonization is welcome, but obviously it's important how they will regulate it, meaning the value, and if they will make a clear differentiation, smoking products compared to the new nicotine products.
And from a running a business standpoint, Tomasz, you might be the best to answer this. Once this is implemented, what has to change? So if you look at the entire supply chain from manufacturing to retail, what currently isn't going to be aligned with implementing this?
You mean what companies could do to be prepared to do the changes?
Not only could do, but have to do.
What have to? Okay, so So first of all, I think, and what is actually happening and happened in companies that are actually operating, is establishing a role within a company that is responsible for the compliance. And of course, it is simply necessity to operate nowadays. We can, of course, support ourselves with external consultants and to some degree, but in the end, we are responsible for the procedures inside the company. So this is what we have to do. This is the one thing, and the second thing, it is maybe mostly related. It is in general related with regulations, but especially with the excise tax. Introducing excise tax in a country simply means that smaller companies are incapable for continuing their operations because the cost of operations are too high, much too high. And that means in terms of preparing the companies in the countries where there is no excise tax already operating, is to assess the portfolio of the products that these companies have and understand what kind of scenarios may happen, what kind of tax scenarios may happen, and what results it brings for these companies, and if they are capable in adapting in a way. And we can see already in Poland and also in different countries that smaller manufacturers simply change their business models because they can't afford being a manufacturer anymore. So it makes the consolidation of market into the bigger players being faster. And also it means that some of these companies, they adapt in a way that they change their business models from manufacturing to being distributors and focusing on marketing and sales, and outsourcing the manufacturing part of business to a different, bigger entity. And sometimes this is the only way, when we see many examples of companies that do it. And of course the question is, if we in the EU would like the market to change in that direction from smaller and medium-sized companies to only bigger companies and big corporations who control much bigger part of the market.
You also want to add specific to that? No? So something very near and dear to my heart is product innovation. Love seeing some of the new stuff down on the floor downstairs, but how will these new categorizations and tax rates change business models? Is it going to affect future-proofing your company and innovation and in further developing your products?
Obviously, so as I mentioned earlier, the level of taxation and a clear differentiation will impact the business a lot, because if one category it's overtaxed, at the end of the day you need to shift to another category, because overtax means at the end of the day black market, and competing with the black market, that's impossible.
Yeah, I fully agree, and also if you don't have the same rules in the rest of the EU countries, then you have to focus on this country here, but if you have harmonization, it's much easier because you have a bigger market. So you can compare, like if you have the whole American market, it's much easier, and then you have to only have few markets in Europe, so it's easier to have the same rules, so you can play on the same level.
Harmonization is needed at all levels, so taxation and overall. Of course, we won't be happy to have regulation instead of directives when it comes to TPD. That can be a risky game, but there is a need to function more as a whole market.
I think innovative markets, generally innovative products, are very difficult to tax ex ante. The best taxation model is probably ex post. So in other words, you know what happened to the market. And you have it in other markets as well. For instance, you do have it in the digital markets. If you look at the big balances of tax in the world, or tariffs in the world, the EU on the trade of goods is positive to the US, but the US is significantly positive in terms of digital services. Yeah? Digital being a very innovative market. Yeah? This is also a very innovative market. And if you look at TPD, you see that very clearly. TPD was not regulating a number of products. Why? Because simply at that moment they were not sufficiently existing. When I mentioned TPD, electricity moved. So if you look at that, you clearly see Article 19, Article 20, Article 20 for the vapes, which is quite a long article in the current TPD. Article 19, very small. Because at that moment, the co-legislators couldn't anticipate such a level of innovation, such an explosion of the market. It's not intelligent that you tax something you couldn't anticipate content-wise.
So when you mentioned different rules for different product categories and harmonization as well, of course we need harmonization. But I would say that if we take a look at TPD, there is some kind of harmonization here, but still there are differences between the countries. And as I mentioned, that what is necessary for the companies to have is to have a compliance role within the companies or compliance department, let's say. And because simply to navigate within the even TPD that already exists, and we are quite familiar with that, there is still so much work to adapt to the changes, the ongoing changes that are being introduced in different countries. And it means that if we have a portfolio of products and simply thousands of indexes, it means that if there are some changes, we have to adapt instantly. We have to be in constant contact with the regulators in different countries. We have to ask them about the changes they plan. We have to coordinate all the adaptation for these changes with our clients, business clients that we have. And this is the case of our company, but any company that manufacture retail products. So even if the market is harmonized in some aspect, TPD aspect, let's say, it still means that there is so much work, and it is quite, maybe unpredictable is a wrong word here, but it is not easy predictable to fit and to adapt to the currently harmonized aspect of the market, which is TPD. And then we have excise tax, which will bring much more work again and much less predictability for the operators, for the manufacturers, for distributors, simply to follow the changes that are constantly introduced in the countries. It is probably if the countries would like to introduce the excise tax themselves, probably this is the best way to introduce the excise tax directive, to make it a little bit more predictable. But then we come back to the first question that we had: what is the goal of the legislation, and where is the balance between the budget income for the countries and EU and the public health, let's say, and predictability of the economy.
Yeah, and that's actually a perfect survey. You know, I've went through the numbers as they stand today and sort of tried to do some rough math on what it would do to in-market products. And it would roughly add between 2 and 4 euros per pack of cigarettes, depending on price point. For a 10 ml bottle for a vape, it would basically add another 2 euros to that product. For pouches, per puck, it would add 0.8 to 1.5 euros per puck. And for heat not burn, per pack of, I don't know what they're called, little sticks, it would add between 1 to 2 euros per pack. So there's a lot of money at stake here. And how, in your opinion, and I'll leave my opinion out, I'm a bit more cynical than I'm hoping the 4 of you are, how is this balance between the decision-making between revenue in a vacuum and the harm reduction public policy that is of critical importance for the continent?
It's a very, very good question. I think a lot is not only in the levels, and your maths are pretty right. It's not just in the level of that increase, but as always, the devil is in the details, and the details are many. First of all, would you take such an increase as a one go, or would you take it staged? In other words, we have a 50 cents every year, which adds up to 2 euros after 4 years? Or is it a 2 euro immediate increase followed by several increases? In other words, is it a French model where predictability somehow existed? So in other words, the finance minister said every year we are going to increase, but prices went very, very high up and the illicit rate followed significantly up. So do you do it in such a way, or do you do it as a direct? Secondly, don't forget that this is, I'm sure you don't, but let's not forget that this is not a regulation, this is a directive. So transposition in member states and maximum levels probably will wildly differ per category. In some cases, some products will not be taxed. Example, the pouches in France. You will not tax a product that you just have forbidden. So clearly, that's a point, but that product will be taxed in other jurisdictions who will not forbid it at different levels. Then you will also have cross-border trade, because that cross-border trade is, the directive may harmonize something like online sales, maybe, there is a try, but it will not harmonize direct sales. If I'm Luxembourg, I am surrounded by consumers. Germany, France, Belgium, they are all high tax jurisdictions next to a low tax jurisdiction. So that will also play. It's very difficult to predict, but I think treasuries should take a very clear look at exactly those elements. And if I will be Luxembourg, I will be much less stressed than if I will be France next door, or Belgium on the other side. Because probably Luxembourg treasury will see things up, the others may see things.
Let me just interject one question, same question, but I would just, do you think that harm reduction from a political standpoint, is there a sentiment that harm reduction should be cost neutral for a country? Getting people to switch from cigarettes to other nicotine formats, no one denies that's a good thing. But is the execution of that within a country, should that be expected to be cost neutral to the budget? Which would make harm reduction extremely challenging.
For the first question, all these taxes is very clear that they don't want to have harm reduction. And they wouldn't have put these high taxes. It's just a money-making thing for the Commission. If it would have been more harm reduction policy, the taxes on cigarettes would be much higher and the other alternatives would be much lower. Because that's very high taxation. And when we see that the harm reduction works very well in Sweden, and they could have done it more like you say, because they lowered the taxes on snus and nicotine pouches, for an example, and raised it on cigarettes, and we keep seeing all the time smokers go down. Even by immigrants group also it's going down, which is positive because they traditionally smoke more than the Swedes. So the Commission wants to make money, not having harm reduction. That's what I read about it.
Yeah, whatever they like, accept or not the tobacco harm reduction, they need it. They committed a few years ago through the Beating European Cancer Plan to decrease the smoking rates from 21, how is now, we're talking about 100 million smokers, down to 5%, below 5% by 2040. Obviously, using the same model, that's not possible. There was ways to decrease the smoking so far, like pricing, like the pictograms from the packaging, some education, let's say, awareness campaign, but they need something else. And that something else is not an experiment, that something else is a proven success. Pouches in Sweden, vaping in UK, and other examples. So, in the same time, smoking cessation brings less cost. Okay, they might collect less, but the expenditures due to health-related disease to smoking will decrease. So, hard to calculate such a scenario, but it's obvious it will have a positive impact.
So you asked if harm reduction should have no effect on budget, right? So if we talk about harm reduction, then if we agree that let's say taxes should exist, then we can say that there should be. I think that as industry we believe that there should be some risk proportionate regulations. So if there should be risk proportionate regulations, then still we have taxes, right? So if we have taxes, then it is not cost-free. There is some income for the country. So then there is an income from implementing harm reduction policy or approach. So there are taxes then, and the question is if they are risk proportionate and if they are implemented in a risk proportionate way, and actually if there are the excise tax introduced in specific countries, I think that the approach of the country or governments to resign from some product category, from NGP product categories, would be very difficult to make because they are a source of a lot of money for the budget. So if we implement excise tax, we actually in some way might support harm reduction, but only if we agree on a level of taxes of excise tax that will be optimal, let's say, from the tax point of view or from the budget, country's budget income point of view. Because of course, what we mentioned already, if we cross that line, we limit the budget income for the country. And I would like to also mention that when the excise tax was introduced in Poland, it was much lower than it is now. Of course, there were some smaller companies that stopped operating because the cost for them to implement and adapt to this new reality was too high. But from the consumer point of view, they didn't switch to cigarettes at that point. The illicit market didn't grow at that point of introduction of this excise tax in Poland, but it started to grow quite rapidly after increasing the excise tax. So it seems that we crossed the line already in Poland, and it might be the urge for the governments to make this excise tax higher because of the higher budget incomes, but it turned out at some point that it limits the budget income because it's too high.
When you talk about smoking, smokers are a big burden on the public budgets in terms of social and health. Governments if they try to solve that, they need to invest money to develop smoking cessation centers, so it's an expenditure. Eventually there's another solution. If I'm not wrong, Clive Bates was writing something about it. Just validate. Right now we're missing somebody to validate that the product has a less damaging profile, a risk reduction profile. So just validate that, and this way you transform the private sector into the smoking cessation campaign. So give a validation, give a proper regulatory landscape, and so that the private companies will develop well and eventually have the smoking cessation without the cost related to it.
On that topic, are the people debating and implementing this and figuring out what the numbers are, I mean, are they looking at a holistic argument? Are they looking at Microsoft Excel, public health, socialized medicine, or are they just looking at current volumes times the new tax equals X in the bank account?
I would say, on one hand, when it comes to taxation, they are looking to that big hole in the budget they need to cover, especially under this geopolitics, crazy madness geopolitics, with increasing costs on the public spending, with less incomes, with inflation, what's the question again? I forget the last part. Sorry.
What lens are they applying on this decision? Is it a macroeconomic, socioeconomic, or is it numbers?
The guys from the taxation, they apply the numbers, but sometimes fail to mind the examples, many examples out there. But when it comes to the health, that's a very ideological approach. So not science-based at all, which is the biggest problem we're facing right now.
And I mean, I live in Sweden, and everybody, you hear about the Sweden experience with smoking. Sweden, and I don't know if you know the numbers, Sweden has by far the lowest smoking rate, but that number I know, but the next number I don't is what is the nicotine usage rate in Sweden? It's very high, but they're all using extremely less harmful options versus smoking. And for a tax to impede that in other markets, to me, is just illogical. unless you're only looking at Microsoft Excel. I mean, that's just my take. So, I want to be conscious of time. We have some 10 minutes or so left. Does anybody have any questions for someone?
If you were to cast around the EU, what is an ideal scenario in terms of tax treatment for pouches and other alternatives?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
If you were to look around, if you were to cast around, is there an ideal scenario? Sorry about that. Third time lucky. If you were to cast around the EU, do you see any ideal scenarios as to how these products are treated that could perhaps serve as a model going forward?
I can reply for vaping. One case we present always when we have stakeholders meetings is the Italian case. So back in 2018, Italy imposed a tax of 40 cents per milliliter. The results immediately the market moved to the black market. They made a forecast back then that they will cash over 100 millions. They managed to cash something below 5 millions. And then they took a decision later, they decreased it to 10 cents. And in that moment, they forecasted something like 60 million and they managed to get more. So that's, we call it the red line case. So it's the conclusions out of that is, of course, the level needs to be very, very proper. I give you here another example, Germany, who has a tax just moved from 26 to 31, and they registered a 40% market share. And let's not forget, Germany, it's a high GDP country. So, and another conclusion after the Italian case is, once you impose a high tax, although you're turning back, a percentage of people remain in the black market, even the tax is 1 cent. There is a behavior that can be turned around. And as Vlad was saying earlier, best way to tax, okay, you want to reach 50 cents per milliliter. Make a calendar of increase over the next years. Take small steps that don't shock the market and then don't force the players to go in the black market.
I think to bind the answer and the question there, you can use Excel on the condition that you use it intelligently today. So Excel is great, SharePoint is nicer, and artificial intelligence on top of both is probably where you want to go. So in other words, if you do that in the tax system, you need to test really elasticity. And you need to understand very well demand side, supply side. What does it happen there? Where is the sweet spot on which my tax will produce money rather than dilute money? And indeed, look at the markets which do work, don't reinvent the wheel. If this works in Sweden, look at why and how. Try to implement that.
Very quick here, and try to not be biased then. When it comes to pouches, Sweden is the best example. Because I remember when this government came to power, they directly, after the next budget, they took down the prices on nicotine pouches and hired the cigarettes to compensate out that. So that worked very well.
Hannes from Austria, Monopoly Agency. The question I have is the following. When it gets to tax, I think there's not a lot of mindset out there that tax is related to external costs that sensitive consumer goods cost. And what I miss is, I do miss newspaper stories telling this kind of story, saying we have tobacco tax because tobacco tax, smoking tobacco is causing external costs. Why is it important? Because if you have less external costs, as you have harm reduction, well, that's good, because then you need less tax. And somehow I miss information of public and miss this. I do not read this in newspapers, and so I did miss your beginning, so I'm not sure what kind of roles you are in, but I think somebody will be industry related, so maybe this is something that we all have to work on.
It's a known fact that no matter if it's smoking or alcohol or the money collected are less than the money spent, so you have a negative balance. Again, hard to calculate going all over the sectors. And all the proofs are out there. Just again, Right now the taxation is regulated under a lot of pressure, with a big need of money, while the TPD is regulated with a very ideological approach. With everything starts, nicotine is bad. Not minding the fact that nicotine is around for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and it will be around, I guess.
As we know that all alternative nicotine products are taxed, not just once, many times through TPD, through customs, through stamp duty, all this. As big companies and you have influence, if it was lobbying or in the market, what are you doing to kind of influence the Commission to have a common tax in every country or reduce the taxes on these products? Because it is good to talk about it between us as in the same market, but what are we doing to influence the politicians to change that system of unbelievable tax where each country is different to the other, but they are in the same commission?
So, we at EVO, we conduct a lot of political engagement, currently under TED and for sure a lot under TPD. Everything is related to expose the science on one hand, to prove them the risk reduction profile and the smoking cessation potential, again proven in Sweden, UK and other parts, and also expose the data. As I was mentioning earlier, the Italian example, we had another example, Estonia imposed a tax, and once they realized everything went black market, they canceled the tax and returned to initial. So overall, expose them to the facts. That's, I would say, the core of our lobbying strategies right now. And of course, meet with as many people as possible. We see at least three categories of policymakers. You have those friendly, looking at the facts, not enough, let's say. You have those against, for certain reasons, sometimes, for certain reasons anyway. And you have the most policymakers in between. For them, maybe it's kind of a taboo topic to touch. But in the same time, let's not forget this is a very political decision around all the future regulation. It's very political.
And also one thing we cannot forget also is that convince the consumers and the voters that harm reduction is the best policy, because then they're forcing the politicians to change their view. That's also a very important thing.
Let here the consumers. I was just looking at some studies, some surveys over the consumers. So the consumers, the vaping consumers, in the past 10 years, they've heard so many news announcing a ban, announcing a high taxation. So they don't care anymore. Honestly, they don't care. Their mindset is, okay, whatever they will ban, whatever they will do, I will make my own e-cigarette if it's banned. I will make my own liquid using ingredients from food sector, from pharma sector. They quit fighting for this.
So I think that when we say and we talk about the titles of the newspapers that sometimes appear about the products that have been marketed that were legal at some point but were unethical to introduce to the market. This is the thing that we, as manufacturers, we shouldn't do. We shouldn't take the opportunity to introduce the legal products that are unethical, because it simply backfires quite fast, and we noticed, we've seen that. And even if we agree that harm reduction is a proper thing, and I think we agree on that, we also, I think, could agree that if there is a company that introduced the unethical product on the market, even if at the moment it's legal, it very makes a big damage for our cause, let's say, and our voice as industry to be listened by politicians and regulators. So the one thing I think that we all do it here as part of industry to simply behave responsibly, but also to seek for some kind of conversation with local governments, politicians, and also as a societies and associations to try to introduce, let's say, or talk with politicians to introduce the laws that will make it impossible for the irresponsible products even to enter the market. So, okay, we all agree that that harm reduction is a proper thing, but what we probably should, it's difficult, but maybe what we should try to think about is how to eliminate, let's say, or lower the number of cases which make a damage for our costs and our approach that we have. So to limit the cases where the improper products are introduced legally to the market, but we all agree that they are improper. And we have seen a lot of that with the nicotine pouches when they first appeared.
I will add here that some panels as what drives innovation, and hard restriction actually drives innovation. And we can see that a lot around, like the 2 ml limit drive a lot of companies to launch the multi-pod 2+, and under the current TPD, something will change in the next TPD, we believe so. They will move from a blacklist ingredient to a whitelist. So at this moment, TPD comes with a blacklist. You're not allowed to use substances that they identify as being harmful, such as diacetyls, vitamins, and so on. Well, the new TPD will come inspired from the lovely Dutch regulation with a whitelist. Most probably will be on pouches as well, on vaping, on everything. So the innovation will be kind of slow down, let's say, and in the same time will solve these kind of problems. I won't say that's a good idea. If I would have to choose, I will keep the blacklist, because the whitelist at the end of the day brings a lot of other risks, and that will be actually the big battle, because what industry can suffer more from is the flavor ban. We can go over many issues like play packaging, maybe advertising ban and so on. But the flavor ban, that will be the biggest hit. So that whitelist, that will be our final battle, let's say, to enlarge it as much as possible, to extend it with the number of flavors as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's an adjacent topic, but definitely a different topic. And I mean, I've been a firm believer that the biggest risks to vaping and pouching aren't regulations. The biggest risks are vape and pouch companies who are going to do something not in the industry's self-interest, which will force the regulations to react to it. So it's going to be a very small minority who are going to change the playing field for the majority. And I think that's been from day one. So I mean, you know, it's, like I said, it's a different topic, but of critical importance for all these industries. Self-policing is the only way to make these categories survive. Because once it gets to the point where the regulatory bodies have to act, it's too late. They're close-minded at that point for the most part. I'm curious to see what's going to happen in France over the next couple of weeks or months, because France's stance right now is absurd. I mean, there's just no other way to categorize it. Something is driving that is not public information yet, because the idea that they think pouches are toxic is nonsense. So there's something else in the room that we don't know yet. I'd hate to think it's money, but we don't know yet.
From what I understand, one of the reasons there were some drugs shipments, they put inside the nicotine pouches, they put drugs. So that was the red flag, and reacted in this disproportionate way.
Yeah, I mean, and then, people smuggle things in car tires. Are we going to get rid of the car industry? I mean, it's an absurd argument. Understood, but it's an absurd argument. Okay, so if there's no other question, I think we are kind of running out of time, but I think there's two, in summary, and thank you all for joining, and thank you for attending. I think there's two very distinct sides of this issue. One is, it's going to happen, so how does it affect all the businesses, whether it's manufacturing, distribution, retail, compliance throughout. And I think that's both on legitimate and how do you react to the illicit market which is waiting to see what happens so they can make their money. It's naive to think they're going to go away. They have a plan. And then the second side, which to me personally is significantly more important, and we've said it multiple times, this cannot be a Microsoft Excel issue. Harm reduction is a societal public health. There's money involved. I'm not going to be naive and think that this is just public health. But the more that we can interject harm reduction, getting people off cigarettes, and in the short term if it costs money, in the long term it saves money, and really just keep these arguments flowing, ultimately, hopefully, people will start to listen. And taxation will start to address more public policy and less finances. I think specific to nicotine, that would be a win for everybody. And one of the things that we in GINN I think are quite good at is keeping everyone up to date about micro issues. We need a domino to fall, and then a bigger domino, and then a bigger domino. So there are a lot of countries out there that are fighting the right battles and having the right discussions. And I think everybody needs to be better educated about who's doing what. Because France gets the headlines, Germany gets the headlines. They're the minority, but they get the headlines. And we need to figure out who's doing it the right way and start pushing that argument. Because there's a lot more to be gained on that than this.
It would be good, if we can have a watch out for like Vlad and Ciprian. It would be great to hear from Vlad and Ciprian. What are your key watch outs over the coming few months? There's a lot going on. There's a lot happening in parallel. What should we alternative nicotine producers, manufacturers, and distributors? What should be keeping us up at night?
I would recommend that you sleep at night. But aside that, I think three things. First of all, look at the evolution of TED and TPD together, not separately. It's very important to understand the categories in TED. It's very important to understand the pluses, but it's also very important to understand, is the product allowed in the first place? Again, look at France. If the product is not allowed in the first place, forget TED. So TPD is going to change many things, probably more than TED. Secondly, to be compliant, try to find a way around. So let me explain to you what I do mean by that. If you are a small actor, you'll probably need a warehouse policy to fix your taxes. Because once track and trace will arrive at work on all categories of products, for smaller companies, that is a too high cost. So find a way to syndicate those costs if you want to survive. And the third thing, try to innovate, try to leapfrog innovation. So the ones who succeed in that zone are usually the ones who strive later. Why? Because they will enter probably into a no taxation zone before taxation will kick in. Yeah, so I would think those. Nothing to add.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.